Dearest God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm going to tell you this morning the story of Bernice. And I want to say that Bernice not only gave me permission to tell her story, but then when I run into her on the streets of my hood in Parkdale, Bernice will ask me, "Did you tell my story?" So I am duty-bound, as this is a new church and this is my first day, to tell you the story of Bernice. Now, Bernice lived rough. That's what it's called. She was homeless. She slept in doorwells, stairwells. She hung out on the street. She didn't like shelters. She didn't go to shelters much. She occasionally got lucky and stayed with some friends. Bernice was about 70 years old when this story took place, and she carried all of her belongings, such as they were, with her, either in a shopping cart or in bags. And she came to our evening service at Emmanuel Howard Park United Church, which was built around a meal. And she came for the food, but she also came for the service. She was profoundly pious, Bernice, in her own way. Now, Bernice rarely got to shower, so there was an odor around her, no doubt. And she sat off by herself where we all had dinner at a table alone. And I was kind of a do-gooder, so I thought I should include her. So I went over to her and I said, "You know, Bernice, there's a whole table over there of people who would love to have you come and sit with them. Why don't you come and sit with us?" And she looked at me as if to say, "Kind of idiot, are you?" And she said, "Do you see the men at that table?" She said, "If I go over and sit there, I am going to drive them wild with lust." Now, Bernice is what I would call a member of the Christian resistance. Because what she taught me in that little encounter, and what she taught all of us, and teaches me still, is that she did not see herself the way the world saw her. She saw herself as a beloved one of God, as a creature of the divine, profoundly beautiful, profoundly, profoundly adored. And Bernice didn't have a lot of truck with the state or with humans. Because you know what the state and the humans had done to Bernice? They had sent electroshock waves to her brain. They had tried to drug her into submission. They had institutionalized her, and they had relegated her to homelessness. Now, Christian resistance is nothing new. And when we try to build a Christian resistance, we are taking part in that baptism that is so elegantly talked about here in Mark and in Luke. It's a baptism not just of water. Water's nice. We all need it. It's a necessity. It's something nice on a hot day. But we are baptized into a baptism of fire and spirit. That is our legacy. That is our birthright as baptized. We are people of fire and of spirit. So when we look at Christian resistance through the ages, and there's always been Christian resistance to the church that adheres to the state. One of the best examples I can think of is the church of the 20th century during the Third Reich in Germany. Now, that church, and about 98% of the churches followed Hitler and were perfectly comfortable supporting Hitler and supporting the Third Reich, about 98% of them, both Catholic and Protestant, hung swastikas in their sanctuaries. That's what they did. And they hailed Hitler, if he should, or his Gestapo, or his representatives should walk past. And it makes you wonder what kind of sermons were preached in those churches. What were the kinds of things said to those people? I suspect the sermons were along the lines of, "I'm okay and you're okay. We're all fine, we're all loved, have a happy day." Sermons that one of the resistors of that time, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said were the dispensing of cheap grace. Cheap grace is what he called it. The grace that goes out to everybody, that doesn't ask questions. That kind of grace, cheap grace, he said. He paid for his Christian resistance with his life. And Karl Barth, who was also part of the Christian resistance of that movement at that time, left, managed to get out, and wrote for the rest of his life about Christian resistance and how to build it. And he said, whenever you preach, you should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. That's what Karl said. And that's what he meant. Another great thinker of the 20th century and great theologian, Richard Niebuhr, once said something, not about the Church of the Third Reich, but said it about the American church much later. He said, "They are a people without sin," and I'm paraphrasing, "led by a God without justice into a kingdom without judgment through the ministrations of a Christ without the cross." That's what he said about the American church. And again, cheap grace, no questions asked, nothing asked, in fact, of those baptized. But folk, we have been baptized into fire and spirit, just like Bernice. Water ain't enough for us. We are a people of resistance, of fire, and of spirit. And what's that mean? What does it mean about divine love when we say that? Well, here's something. I don't know how many of you have seen one of my favorite films, Moonstruck. But in Moonstruck, Nicolas Cage has a wonderful soliloquy, and again, I'm going to paraphrase, and he says it to Cheri because they've just fallen passionately in love with each other, but she's engaged to his brother, and he says, you know, love isn't nice. That's what he says. Love isn't nice. Love ruins everything. What is the Christian view of love? It's far from a Hallmark card. The Christian view of love is the cross. It's the ultimate sacrifice. It's the love that gives everything for the sake of one's other humans. It's that love. It's that passionate, fiery, spirited love that costs. It costs and it demands of us. Yes, it demands. My favorite professor, we should not say anything about the professors here. I love you all. Loved you all. But my favorite professor and my thesis advisor at Emmanuel once said to me that when you are baptized as a Christian, nothing is promised to you that will be any worse than death on the cross. Now, that's kind of morbid. I like to think that he left something out, which is the other side of the promise. And the promise is that if you are baptized into fire and spirit and water, if you are baptized into Christian resistance, that you are promised that you will win, that you are promised that justice will win. It's a promise. It's a promise that oppression will end, that peace will break out everywhere, that the environment will be saved. That's a promise too. And I wonder now about the kinds of sermons that are happening in our midst, both south and north of the border. Because south of the border, I wonder how many sermons are saying about the Republican Party and Donald Trump the same thing that Noam Chomsky said, that they are, and remember I was just talking about Nazis, the most dangerous organization in the history of the world. Because why? Because they're hastening the destruction of our planet, and because they are threatening nuclear war. I wonder how many sermons this day throughout the United States are saying something like that. I wonder how many sermons in Canada are saying something about our treatment of our First Nations people. I wonder how many sermons in Canada are saying we are the country that invented apartheid. Yes, we did. We sold it to South Africa. They copied it from us. How many sermons in this country are saying something about the fact that our First Nations, many of them in Ontario, can't drink the water, never have been able to because it's poisoned, or about First Nations, again across this country, whose children don't get physical care, the mental care, or the educational care that white kids do. I wonder how many sermons are mentioning that? How many sermons are just saying, I'm okay, you're okay, have a happy day? But that, my friends, is not good enough for us. That's not what we're called to. We are called to be a people baptized by fire and by Spirit. And just to finish the story of Bernice, because I will, that's not the end, not by a long shot. So she humored me, Bernice did, she humored me, and she came and sat with us at the other table, and I don't know whether she drove him wild with lust, but one of the men there and Bernice ended up getting married. Yes, they did. And he was about 20 years younger than her, about 20 years younger than her. I performed the wedding. It was a joyous wedding. It cost nothing. Her wedding gown was donated by Goodwill. The food was provided by Second Harvest. We all rejoiced in that day that celebrated Christian resistance. So blessings be upon you, and know that in this new year, 2018, boy, the task is large before us, but we are assured of success. As I often said in my political life to those who fought for justice, there's no question you will win. The only question is when. So know that you're blessed, and know that you are fiery.